Good evening and welcome to this event at the Mathematical Institute in the University of Oxford on the 1st of February 2022. We have a stellar lineup of speakers this evening. The main speaker will be Bishop Sorondo, who is the Chancellor of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, just flown in from Rome. And we also have two professors of the university to speak before and after Bishop Sorondo. We have Ian Shipsey, Head of Physics. I just said to him earlier, he would have been my boss a few decades ago, because I trained as a physicist here at Oxford in particle physics. So it's wonderful to welcome Professor Shipsey. And after Bishop Sorondo, my present boss, Alistair McGrath, will say a few words, and then we'll have a little bit of a discussion, hopefully between Alistair McGrath and Bishop Sorondo, to kick us off, and then a general Q&A. Before all these things happen, we wanted to welcome Bishop Sorondo because he's also from Argentina, and his native language is Spanish, and he works in Italian. So I wanted to convince him that we're also civilized in Oxford. And I have a student from Latin America, Maria Beer, who's just finishing her doctorate in theology, and she's going to say a few words of welcome in your own language, Your Excellency, to welcome you to Oxford. Thank you very much.
En nombre de los numerosos estudiantes latinoamericanos en Oxford y teniendo en cuenta las crecientes relaciones académicas entre Oxford y Latinoamérica, tengo el honor de darle la bienvenida a Monseñor Marcelo Sorondo. Es una alegría para todos contar con su presencia entre nosotros. A lo largo de su destacable carrera académica, usted ha podido presenciar cómo se manifiesta en nuestra cultura una profunda brecha, no solo entre el mundo de la ciencia y el de la fe, sino también entre las disciplinas científicas y las humanidades. Este proceso de fragmentación se ha extendido a muchos ámbitos de la cultura. Yendo en contra de este fenómeno, usted le ha dado prioridad al trabajo de sanar esa fragmentación y de unir a la humanidad, señalando incansablemente el principio teologal de participación en la naturaleza divina. No hay aspecto de nuestra vida en sociedad al que no pueda alcanzar el efecto transformador de la gracia divina. Muchos de nosotros hoy en Oxford seguimos líneas de investigación similares, examinando la antropología ontológica fundada en la unión entre Dios y la persona humana, que incluye las virtudes infusas, tanto morales como intelectuales, y los dones del Espíritu Santo. A ejemplo de Santo Tomás, que con fecundidad inimaginable incorporó a su visión del mundo el pensamiento más reciente y refinado, basamos también aquí la investigación en los nuevos descubrimientos de la ciencia, y en particular de la psicología experimental. Mediante fenómenos como atención unida, meeting of minds o imitación, buscamos comprender la relación personal con Dios nuestro Señor de yo a tú, de la cual el sacramento del matrimonio es imagen y da, como usted dice, resonancia y resplandor a la divina sinfonía de los salmos y la sagrada liturgia, encontrando su fundamento en la Santísima Trinidad. Le agradecemos inmensamente su liderazgo y su visita a Oxford.
Thank you very much, Maria. If you've seen the posters of this event, you may wonder why we've got the James Webb Space Telescope on the posters. First, because it's a lot of fun. It's very photogenic. But I also saw the launch on Christmas Day. And I've been watching this project from a distance for 30 years. And the head of NASA was there. And he was clearly a bit nervous. And after the event, after the successful launch, and after $10 billion of investment had not blown up on the launch pad, he was quite emotional in his talk. And he referred to the scriptures. He referred to Psalm 19, the heavens proclaim the glory of the Lord. And since James Webb has now reached safe orbit, and hopefully will work, then it seemed like what will become a great symbol of science in the 21st century. Which then leads into a man who works running Oxford Physics, and is very much at the cutting edge of so much of science in the 21st century, Professor Ian Shipsey.
Thank you. So it's a real pleasure for me to welcome all of you as well on behalf of the university itself, as well as the Department of Physics. This event is entitled, as you know, after Galileo, Faith and Science in the 21st Century. It is a particular pleasure for all of us in the Physics Department to welcome to Oxford Bishop Marcelo Sánchez Sorondo. As you know, he is the Chancellor of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. And as the previous speaker said, I'm Ian Shipsey. I do have the privilege of being the head of the Department of Physics, but I don't really run it. We're very democratic, we're very open, and you'll be welcome to come back at any time and join us again. So it's a very common view in the academy and in each of our departments that one must choose in some way between science and faith. And yet in my own department, and in all of the other departments that you find in Oxford and around the world, what we find are families of scholars, from students to professors, 1,700 students and professors in my own department, and some are religious, with many, many religions being represented, and they see no or very little contradiction between science and faith. And some have no religion. They feel and they see the contradiction between science and faith. And importantly, we live together harmoniously, pursuing scientific inquiry and nurturing future generations, as all of our departments do in this university and all other universities. We make discoveries that improve the human condition, and we are united in a conviction that science, technology, engineering, and medicine are the best hope for humankind to overcome the immense challenges that society faces today, such as global warming. Contradictions between science and faith seem to abound. For example, Genesis claims that God created the world in 7 days, but science indicates that the universe, including the earth, developed over billions of years. Genesis talks about Adam and about Eve and all of earth's creatures being created by God, but science indicates that life, including human life, evolved over millions of years. Bible stories are rife with miracles, while modern life does not seem to be. And infamously, the Catholic Church put Galileo on trial. How is it possible that some have reconciled these apparent contradictions? A solution in many cases is a non-literal interpretation of Scripture, to understand Scripture in context. The complicated conflict between Galileo and the Church nearly 500 years ago was partially based on scientific dispute, but also has much to do with the conflicts of personality and politics and theology of that time. Galileo's view that the earth rotated around the sun was held by many people of that time, including Jesuit priests in good standing. Pope John Paul II said, "The error of the theologians of that time, when they maintained the centrality of the earth, was to think that our understanding of the physical world's structure was in some way imposed by the literal sense of Scripture." As you know, Galileo remained a Catholic his entire life, And many Catholics are scientists today and in the past. Many are quite remarkable: Descartes and Pascal and Mendel and Pasteur and Galileo, and the cleric Nicholas Copernicus, who first developed scientifically the view that the Earth rotated around the sun. The originator of what came to be known as Big Bang Theory of the origin of the universe was Georges Lemaitre, a Belgian physicist and Roman Catholic priest. Alexander Fleming, Erwin Schrödinger, John Eccles, and Alexis Carrel were Catholics too, while many scientists are not religious at all. There is a Catholic teaching that faith and reason are not opposed, but rather complementary, and that scientific reasoning and faith are mutually enriching. The Pontifical Academy of Science is comprised of eminent scientists of all faiths and of no faith at all. For example, Stephen Hawking was a member. Martin Rees, the past president of the Royal Society, is a member today. And that academy has as its goal the promotion of the progress of the mathematical, physical, and natural sciences, and the study of related epistemological questions and issues. So it's a really remarkable topic that we're going to discuss today. And it is a genuine pleasure for me and all of us, on behalf of the university and the department, to have the Chancellor of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences here tonight to give his reflection on this topic. After Galileo, Faith and Science in the 21st Century. And I encourage everyone to make the most of this unique opportunity and ask questions at the end of the talk and during the discussion. Welcome everybody again. Please welcome His Excellency.
So can I speak from here? It's
What
better.
would you prefer to do, Your Excellency? You can speak from the lecture, and we get the mic, then we get the application.
Okay, and after.
Or you sit down, but it may not be quite so clear. So
Okay,
I will speak from here if you can.
okay. Sorry, because I'm an old man with my legs not perfect anyway. So thank you for the invitation. And I really enjoy this invitation and to be here, because the first impression that we have when I arrived to Oxford is the important to have the study, the important to have consecrate the life to study, to know the truth. So it's not in all cities the same impression. I would like to thank Peter Chassas from the Royal Society Research Scholar, Father Matthew Power, Senior Chaplain of the Oxford University Catholica, and Father Andrew Penson, Research Director of the Jan Ramsen Center for Science and Religion, for this important invitation to speak about this very complex subject in the Catholic Church view in the 21st century challenge in relation with science, faith, philosophy. Sorry, I was professor of philosophy, so I asked to take consideration my deformation, professional deformation in my speech. In general, we can say that the question of today's world is the same as ever. The same question to have the human being from the beginning. The philosophy put the question of truth, the question of good, the question of justice, and the relations about this that we say are the transcendentals from the time of Plato, Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, Hegel in the modern world, and today Heidegger, also Kant. I speak about this venerable doctrine of the transcendental, and of course Paul Ricoeur. The argument I would like to present is it is possible today to provide a contemporary version of this venerable philosophy of the ancients, as say Kant. The mutual conversion of the transcendentals. You know, the Latin say, and is quoted by Kant, quolibet ens es unum, es verum, es bonum. This is in Latin. Here, I see there are many things right in Latin, so I take this to say in Latin. This doctrine cultivates for all the philosophy in a transversal way, in fact, seem to be terribly abstract, but is very simple and fundamental, and say that everything, every being, insofar as it is one true and good for the human soul, for the human being. So we have in the soul, we, and not the superior animals, and we can demonstrate this by our actions. We have a tendency to the good, and we have a capability to understand the things, to knowledge. So this is the more important thing. And all things that exist appeal to our soul, in the sense that we are interested to know, and in the sense we are interested to understand is a good or not for us. It's just or not just. So, for example, what is the meaning of all the professors? What is the meaning of all the students? What is the meaning of all the communication in this world? To understand what is truth. I know that we are in some currents today to speak about the post-truth society. But this is nothing. It's not real. It depends on the dictatorship of the money, as say Pope Benedict. It's not the real question. So I think the truth is a central question. And of course, the truth is a good for the intelligence, for the human being. But we have a good for all the society that is not exactly the truth, but is, together with the truth, other things. And we call this justice. And we call this the common good. So we need, in all knowledge, put together the truth and the good, or justice. It's very simple. We can say the good is the justice for society. Well, we can demonstrate this, but I don't want to expend many time in this demonstration. So, and the truth, to knowledge the truth, have many dimensions that are developed in the history. One dimension is the philosophic dimension, then is to knowledge what is our being, what is our dignity, what is true and what is not true, what is good and what is not good. These are the file of philosophy. But also we have a new form of truth that come from, well, also for the Greeks, but have a great development in the modernity with Galileo Galilei, by the way. That is the truth of science. That is a truth. And I would say that this is the reason, as say Nietzsche in the Gaia Scienza, this is the reason because the Catholic Church created the Academy of Sciences, because understand that sciences give a truth, a dimension of the truth, that is not in the philosophy, and is not in faith. And to have a completely knowledge, integral knowledge of the human being and also of our world, we need to have also science. So we have the truth of philosophy, we have the truth of science, that are also in relation. Aristotle said in the beginning of the metaphysics, is the admiration, taumatzing, to provoke the interest of knowledge. And in the beginning, it is knowledge of sciences, and after is knowledge of philosophy. Aristotle, as you know, called his reflection in this, in philosophy, metaphysica after physics, and also put the theology. So we have the knowledge of religion, the truth of religion. And of course, we can summarize in very brief things. We have a sort of philosophy and phenomenology, religion, three very important approach. From a perspective universal of religion. And the first approach is, we can say, have the city in Benares, in India, and we can say is the approach of God is all, God is nature, God is, we say, pantos, all things is God. That we can say is a person or not, we can have two interpretations. The other approach is more philosophical, and we call this approach natural theology, and it's Aristotle. Aristotle is the first that in Metaphysica call God, God, theos, is the first. And after all people, when speak about God, call God. So, and after come the Christian faith, that, of course, for Thomas Aquinas, we have here some Dominican fathers know very well, is God is the ipsum esse subsistens. It's not a substance. It's all. It's not easy to explain in 5 minutes, but have a completely different interpretation. And this God live in a Trinity life, and with incarnation communicate this life to us by the divinization as was quoted. Thank you very much for your quotation. So, but this kind of truth, the Church tried to put together in his doctrine, in his teaching, in his magisterium. And this is the reason to have sciences and to have the Academy of Sciences. And I want to speak especially about this because here there are many scientists. So, as I said in the beginning, we have some truth that come from sciences that we cannot have by philosophy, cannot have by faith. Of course, especially all the studies of our body, our life, come from sciences. We know, for example, for the COVID, the more important question, the vaccine and the solutions come from sciences, not religion. So, and we try to put together, we need to say it's not easy because we need to recognize that we don't have an univoc language. We need to have different language to understand this different part or participation of the truth. We have the language of sciences, and we have the language of philosophy, we have the language of religion, and we try, there are convergence, and we try to see this analogy, this convergence, without resolve one in another. Because religion and faith continue to be a special space, the same for science, the same for philosophy. But there are connections. The first connection is the relation with the good. And it's clear, we can read more in detail my speech, but it's clear that in the moment of we have a project of research, for example, in science, we need to know, is this project and this investigation is for the good of the people or not. We understand the importance to have the fusion, the atomic fusion. And to know the atomic fusion is a real important truth, an important good. But we can use this for the war. We can use this for another thing, not for the good of the person. So we can see, against to the justice, to the power of some countries and not for all people. So we have to put in relation the truth with the good, with the justice, with ethics, with philosophy, and also for some things with faith that also indicate an ethic. So this is very important to have this complementarity. And all this, and so it's easy to see the relation between the truth with the good, with the justice. Because I say the truth needs to be to the justice and to the good of the people. But it's more complicated to understand, to go from the justice to the truth, to the theoretical truth. But it's necessary, and this is the basis of the anthropology. We can understand ourselves, but in a space of auto-reflection directly of our soul. We can see also spiritual, our soul, our spirit, the part of all cultures that say that human beings have not only matter, but have another dimension. All the cultures in the history. And also, look, just the other week in the Academy we have a meeting about the religion in the early human beings. And this was organized by Coppens. Coppens is a very famous anthropologist and was the person to discover Lucy. I don't know if you know Lucy. Lucy is a lady to live 3,200,000 years ago. And the conclusion of this meeting, I was the unique priest, bishop, not more, the other are all scientists, is that the characteristic of religion, the characteristic of the human being, just in this moment, in just the beginning of the human being, is religion, is that have some kind of religion. Not religion we understand today like a Benedictine monk, but religion in the very large sense that we can say, from another anthropologist, that is the awareness that have these people from the beginning, Lucy, that have they are some superior being that can help us. And we can have a contact with this superior being and ask to help us. So kind of prayer. So this was the conclusion of our meeting about evolution. So look, this is important because the version that we have of evolution, of course, Darwin, you know better than me, but the version that we have today, promoted by this that the Pope Francis called the pensée unique, the mainstream. The version is that we are matter and no more than matter. And we are maybe the more important evolution of the matter, and we come from the chaos or necessity, but in the end, we are a product of the chaos, and we live with the nothing before and with the nothing in the future. Not other thing that matter. So they don't say it really the things that believe, but this is really the idea. So religion is a medieval question that we don't need to ask. We, humans, can save ourselves without any help of God. Yeah, maybe we can ask these people to speak, but any influence, God have any influence in the history, the human being, just the history, and finish. This is very clear. The program, the Pope Francis called this the colonization, the ideological colonization of the mainstream. So I say this because just in the academy, with these other people that are specialists in cultural anthropology, show the difference of the human being from the beginning with the superior other animals is that the religion, some activity of religion. So, and that is very interesting because if we reflect about our activity, we find that our activity is, in some sense, some part of our activity, like knowledge, like will, that is not transcend the matter, in part transcend the matter. So we suppose it's our activity, as we suppose in the early human have some activity to transcend the matter, that we have a principle, interior principle, that transcends the matter, that is the soul. So, in the conclusion of this meeting, we say, maybe we don't have the same biological code of Lucy, because Lucy not was in the lane of sapiens sapiens, but we have the same soul, spiritual soul, different of the soul of the animal, superior animal. So, this is to go from the good, from justice, to our truth, the truth that we are. So, what is my brief conclusion? And I'm very happy to open discussion, because the more important thing is what do you think about this question, and I can maybe communicate my ideas as consequence of this meeting that we have in the academy. So the conclusion is that today we need an integral vision of the human being and after our world, and the possibility to be open to the transcendence, to God. And this we can do if we begin from the truth, or if we begin from the reflection of our activity in the good, our activity of justice, that suppose a spiritual principle to inform us that we say is the soul. So, thank you. And of course, for the Christians, because we have the soul, transcendent soul, we have the possibility to be in partnership with God, especially after the incarnation of Christ, by the grace of Christ, that is, as say St. Peter in the second letter, a participation of the divine nature. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bishop Sorondo. And you talked about the integral vision of science and the humanities. And here at Oxford, we have a chair for science and religion. It's very unusual in the world. And I'd like to invite the chair, Alistair McGrath, to say a few words. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Chancellor. Thank you very much indeed for your introduction as well. And I think the place to start is there is this deep cultural perception that science and religion are still at war. And history seems to point that way, and contemporary debates sometimes as well. Indeed, when I was falling in love with the sciences myself back in the 1960s, that was what people thought. You know, science and religion are at warfare. I loved science, and therefore, it seemed to me I was personally at war with religion. But I don't think that now, and I don't think most people think that anymore, actually. History has offered us radical rethinkings of Galileo and many others, which make us, I think, much more alert to much more positive possibilities. And certainly, I think the Chancellor's theme tonight of a need for an integrated way of thinking, that really, I think, is a very helpful idea to pursue. Because it seems to me that really the task is not to say there is philosophical truth, there is religious truth, there is scientific truth, you choose which one's right. But rather to say these are, in effect, offering us different perspectives, different ways of thinking, and inviting us to find a way of bringing them together in a fruitful and meaningful dialogue. And that seems to me to be a very helpful way ahead. As a sort of equivalent of Galileo today, we might think of Einstein. Einstein, as you will know, was a very able physicist, but he was also someone who was a passionate socialist, who was very, very clear that scientists had to be ethical people. He was very worried about the atomic bomb. And also he had this real passion about religion, even though he understood that in his own rather idiosyncratic way. And Einstein was quite clear: science, religion, politics, ethics, religion, these are different. That does not mean they are incompatible. It just means that there is work to be done to bring them together, to find a way of somehow allowing them to cross-fertilize, to have critical and constructive conversations. And that, I think, is something that's very important. Because the temptation, I think, is simply to say, if this is right, then that has to be wrong. And that's why I think Einstein is very interesting. He did not really help us to understand how he held these together, and maybe it was sort of intuition, but nevertheless he believed that to be an integrated human being, the ideal has been set out for us so clearly this evening, you had to find a way of holding these together. Whether it is a personal integration, this is the way in which I am able to do it, or whether there's some deeper intellectual vision, for example, what you might find in Thomism, which allows you to be able to do that. And that seems to me to be a very significant way of approaching this question, to try and think of a way of allowing cross-fertilization, in effect dialogue without this sense that there is a sort of animosity here, that there is a possibility for enrichment and for moving the discussion ahead. Now, again, I don't want to quote Einstein again because he's very interesting, but Galileo was very much on our agenda this evening, and he was a very powerful, very able thinker. And I think that he leaves us a very important legacy. And for me, in many ways, we're faced with this situation. There's a real danger that we understand how our world functions. In other words, mechanically, how do things actually happen? But there are deeper questions, not simply how does our universe, how does our Earth work? But this deeper question, how do we learn to value it? How do we learn to respect it? How do we learn to inhabit it meaningfully? And certainly most of the great natural philosophers of the 17th and early 18th century saw that as being a passion. You think of Robert Boyle, the image of a priest in the temple of nature. This is not simply about understanding our world, it's about respecting it and caring for it. And I would certainly argue that religious faith gives you a framework for beginning to do that. So it seems to me there are some very important questions here. Can we find a way of respecting difference, but at the same time realizing that this gives us the opportunity of, in effect, bringing together a plurality of insights and finding a way of allowing them to enrich each other and leave us in a better place than where we were before. And I think, for me, is the point I take away from the Chancellor's lecture this evening. We have multiple approaches to understanding our world, ourselves, a greater world, what God is like, and how we live meaningful lives in this world. And it seems to me that the task really is, how do we bring these together, respecting their differences, but at the same time allowing them to begin to build a bigger picture of our world and helping us to think through how we might live in that world. And certainly it seems to me that we've been given some very helpful ways of thinking about this, because there are many scientists who perhaps have this instinct that there is more to the world than science is able to allow. I'll give you one example from Oxford. When I was studying chemistry myself, one of my mentors was R.J.P. Williams, a very able inorganic chemist who, in effect, was fascinated by the relation of inorganic chemistry in the biological world. And he was what I would call a very irreligious person, and he and I kept in touch, in fact, right up until his death. And I remember a late conversation we had. Basically, as a scientist, he was looking at the world, looking at fine-tuning in the physical world, and actually the evidence for biological fine-tuning. He said to me one day over lunch, Alistair, I'm not a religious man, but there's something bloody strange going on here, and I'd love to know what it's all about. Now, as a theologian, I perhaps wouldn't use that language, but nevertheless, the intuition is there. There's more to be discovered. I think we've been given a very good vision tonight for that excitement of, in effect, bringing different perspectives together, going deeper into things. And I think that's something we can respect. I think it's something we can certainly work with. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor McGrath. Now, at this stage, I had envisaged you having a little dialogue with the Chancellor. You might want to come and sit with him. But it may be they want to launch straight into general questions. So what would you like to do? Would you like to do you have any questions you'd like to ask the Chancellor directly? Or vice versa?
You are the organizer.
I'm the organizer. But at this stage, it may be we want to open up to people. So I'll leave it up to you. And do you have any topics you want to raise in the first instance? Or shall we open it up to everyone?
Why don't you open it up?
I'll open it up. Okay. So please raise your hand if you've got any questions. I'll try to keep the questions short if you can. I'll repeat them so we get them in the recording, and then hand this over to our esteemed guests. So, any questions? Yes, sir, at the back there. Yes, sir. Yes.
So thank you very much for both your speeches. I think they were very interesting. I was wondering about the fact that both of you actually were using examples at the end of your respective speeches. You say that even though science and religion cannot be in contradiction, science can give clues basically to the need for religion or the need for other types of answers. And I was wondering if you would then believe that it is possible, just not necessarily true, but conceivable, that science would give clues to the absence of a religion or the absence of a religious explanation of the world.
So, are there clues? Now, slightly misunderstood questions. First of all, you were saying that our speakers have given clues or suggested there are clues for the existence of religion or religious explanation. But you're also asking the question, are there clues to the non-existence of religion or non-existence of religious explanation?
Yeah, and the fact that thinking that there could be clues that science gives in favor of religion should be entailed that this could also be clues in the other direction.
Okay, I think both our speakers want to say something, so excellent, thank you.
I think it's a very interesting question. According with my experience in the academy with these scientists, especially natural scientists, very big Nobel Prize winners. So we can give this answer. There's some subject could be close to the, we say, to the transcendent dimension, to the spiritual dimension of the human being, to recognize that the human being has a spiritual soul and that can arrive to God, be partner of God, maybe. And also, he can work with any metaphysics scruples, we can say. Yes, Could be. But the general culture not could be closed because, because it's again to the history of the human being. There are other dimensions that we continue to cultivate it. Philosophy, religion, live, and with very strong force. So, yes, some subject could be closed in some time of his life, but maybe not in all his life, because in some moment, maybe change, maybe. For one or the other, in the other side, we don't say, but not the general culture. For example, in the academy, we have this. We have someone, maybe, that not have any metaphysical scruple, but not the totality.
So it can't happen that you're completely closed. Professor McGrath, would you agree with that? Or?
Well, I think I'd want to talk more about this, but the question, I think, is a very good one, because we might begin by saying that actually the world is open to multiple interpretations. You know, that there's a genuine question here about whether a scientific explanation is complete, whether it's provisional, and where it takes us in relation to religious beliefs. So I think that's a very important thing. And certainly I would say there are some developments in science which do point in a theistic direction, others that don't. And in many ways, the question really is, what is your big picture which is able to accommodate these as best as you can? In other words, which respects the tensions here, but nevertheless says, on the whole, this is a way that I think works in trying to make sense of that. So I would say that, in effect, the starting point for really taking your very good question further would be to say that actually we are in a situation where the evidence is ambiguous. You know, that we can't sort this out by the scientific method alone. Therefore, we have to bring other questions into it. And one of them might be the extent to which a religious way of thinking actually makes sense of this complicatedness and actually gives you a way of existing here without actually being absolutely certain. In other words, you don't have absolute cognitive certainty, but you might have a deeper existential certainty that this way of thinking is right. That's a very short answer to a very good question, but it's good to be alerted to that very important point.
I'd like to follow up with the question, because 30 years ago I was working at CERN, and we accidentally invented the internet. And it was an accident. We were linking physics documents together, and suddenly the whole world was copying us. I remember Bill Gates saying that the internet will never be important, believe it or not. He probably believed it at first. But that was an example of a spin-off from science that was great practical benefits, and we're still not fully absorbed all the implications. But a lot of things we do in science have no practical benefit whatsoever. So, I mean, this wonderful James Webb Space Telescope will probably inspire us for the next 30, 40 years with images, if it all works. But it probably won't give us any practical benefits. So that raises a question. How will science fare, or how do you think science will survive if we become a purely materialistic society? A provocative question. How will science survive, or how will it fare in a purely materialistic society? Please.
Well, you say the philosopher, Vico, philosophy of history, say we have the corsi and ricorsi. So we have some course to go in one sense, and after we have the recourse to go in a contrary sense. And the history is full of course and recourse. Maybe in this moment we have a course to put only a vision. I think that is true. The thing that say Pope Francis is not real philosopher to do this, but it's the money. We have the dictatorship of the great enterprise, we can say global enterprise, that have interest to promote this idea that we are only matter that not come from sciences, because as I say, the anthropologists of our academy that not are special are the more famous, don't say this. So this is an invention. It's a vulgar thing. The media is communicate these things, but the media I pay for someone, and I say for France. So I think in this moment maybe we have this corso, but maybe we can have the records in the history. I don't believe that we can arrive to a society that only believes in matter. No, don't believe that.
I think I would say two things. One is in response to your question of why do we do science when the answers don't seem to be particularly helpful to our present situation. Well, I mean, we can all remember Charles Townes inventing the laser. And, you know, people would say, there's a solution without a problem. Yes. I mean, look at where we are now. You know, where lasers just kind of are part of the way we live. And again, that we have to bear in mind that what we find may not have an immediate payoff, but in the future it may do so. So I think that's one of the points I'd want to make. But I think I would also want to make that actually my impression is that as I talk to younger scientists these days, there's a much greater receptivity to saying science is wonderful, but it doesn't answer all our questions. And indeed, by forcing it to answer certain questions, we're actually damaging its science. And so I do think that there's a willingness to say, look, science is wonderful, and that's I mean, look at vaccines, they're wonderful. But there are other issues as well, and the issue, I think, is bringing science into dialogue with other things to give us this richer or integrated way of thinking, which I think may deal not simply with, for example, physical issues we're dealing with, but also human well-being, which very often is all about, you know, a sense of meaning, a sense of value. You know, yes, we are matter, but we matter, if you see the point I'm trying to make, and trying to find out how we interpret that in this very situation we're in.
Well, thank you. Professor Briggs.
I'd like to ask the Chancellor two questions about what sounded like a fascinating discussion about Lucy at the Pontifical Academy. And the first one is about soul, which is a malleable concept. In the Hebrew word can just mean any living thing, which could be an animal or anything. And the Greek concept may be more Platonic sometimes in its use. To what extent were you able, amongst these scientists, to reach a consensus of an operational definition of soul that you could use and share together? And the second question is about the evidence in the case of Lucy. So many people, when they're looking for evidence before writing of religious motivation, look to rock art, cave paintings. In the case of the discussions about Lucy, what was it that led people to conclude that she had indeed got a religious dimension to her existence?
I'll just repeat the last line there. What led them to conclude that Lucy has a religious dimension to her existence?
So the conclusion was signed by many of our academicians, and some of them are neurologists, and I don't think that believe in the soul, to say the truth, but don't say nothing. He signed the conclusion. I don't have here the conclusion, but quoted Aristotle, the idea of soul of Aristotle, so the anima of Aristotle. I can send to you, give me after your email, and I'll send the conclusion. But look, the question is this. Of course, as say Coppens said this. Coppens was the organizer and was the person to find this lady. And he said this. In this moment, we have stones, funerary stones. Before also, 3,400,000 years ago, we have already stones that are symbols, not only to be instruments to other things, but are copy of the instruments. And of course, was a very famous scientist in the meeting to ask to Coppens. But in what sense you can say that this stone symbol is something religious? And Coppens replied to say, yes, we can make so many distinctions, but in the end was religious. All was combined with religion. So this symbol, stone, because it's a copy of the instrument stone, is not made by the superior animals. There are also instruments in the superior animals, but not symbols. And in this symbol, there are also religion. That is the reply to say. So they say, we can say that the family, human family, is unified because have a different soul of the animals. You know, for Greeks, the animals also have a soul, but it's not an incorruptible soul, as we say. So, and this identification of the human family for Coppens is more clear than the genetic code. That, of course, is important. This is the question. Thank you. Thank you for the question.
I had a comment from Chesterton, birds build nests, but don't build nests in the Gothic style. So maybe there's a difference between an instrument and a symbol. Any other questions? Quite a few here. Gentleman at the back there.
I'd like to ask a question relating theory to evidence, I guess. People are interested. Einstein gave a lecture in the 1930s in Oxford, and the blackboard he used is in the History of Science Museum in Broad Street. There was only one piece of data at the time, so it's a bit of a long question, but there's a reason, which was that the Hubble had discovered that the universe was expanding. And in 5 lines of equations, he worked out that the universe was 10 to 100 billion years old, he deduced. That was a theory. Then one of the pre-space telescopes before James Webb mapped the cosmic background microwave radiation, and they deduced from that that the universe was 13.4 nowadays billion years old. So there was a theory, and then that was proved and validated by data. The problem I have with religious concepts, a couple of which were mentioned in the talks, was soul or creator, or the one that was mentioned, miracles. And you might say, well, that's separate from the evidence, but science likes to have evidence for things. And I don't know how to put this politely, but I've not seen any evidence for a soul or evidence for creator or miracle. So I know they're complementary, but doesn't science need to be able to justify some of the things that are theoretical from a religious point of view? Does that make sense?
Okay, I'll summarise for the video. Where's the evidence? We talk about these religious. No, it's a very good question, and we're perhaps using these religious terms like soul a little bit too loosely. And one of the demands an English empiricist will look for is the evidence. So, what would you say about evidence?
No, I agree with you. And this is very important in general, to put the question in the convenient approach of the different disciplines of the knowledge. So the question of God and the question of the soul is not a scientific question. We can demonstrate with science that we have a soul. We can start the demonstration with science, but the conclusion is a philosophical conclusion. The same of the existence and nature of God. Of course, we agree with some Cambridge very famous scientists to say, I can find God in the nature. No. If you don't have faith, you can find God in the nature. Of course, if you have faith, like St. Francis, you understand that all nature is created by God, by the way of philosophy, by the way of religion, and you can see the presence in all things of God, as St. Thomas Aquinas. in the sixth question of the theological Summa, that the presence of God is in all things, because give the being, give the existence, give the life, well, things that say also the philosopher before Christ. So, but this is a philosophical approach. It's not a scientist approach. The president of the academy, that was a very famous biologist, Albert, say, the creation, about creation, I can find in science the creation, the moment of the creation. No. No, and it's not as and Thomas Aquinas say, the beginning of creation, the creation we can have a demonstration, philosophical demonstration, because all being is a participation of the being by essence. But the beginning of creation in time is a question of faith. We cannot demonstrate this. And this was a very famous discussion with some Bonaventura that say the contrary. And today in the academy follow the idea of Thomas Aquinas for this question. So I agree with you. There are things that can demonstrate of science, of course, also for the question of life, the question of body. There are many things that the faith can say nothing about this and can demonstrate nothing. So there are fields that correspond some one discipline and the other, and we try to integrate one thing with the other.
I think I would want to just add to that as a former scientist, I would agree with you. The importance of evidence is there all the time, and indeed that is what gives science its great strength. But not every area is amenable to the same evidential criteria. In other words, if you go across the spectrum of the sciences, you do find that things become perhaps less crystal clear as you move, for example, from physics to, for example, psychology. And I think that one of the problems we find is that we are faced with a lot of questions, not necessarily scientific questions. I think the distinction made here between scientific questions, religious questions is a very good one, but there are questions like, what is the best thing to do in this situation? What is the right attitude to take towards our world, and so on? And there actually we are moving into a situation where science can inform, I think, our thinking, and that is very, very welcome, but not actually determine the outcome. We have to use human judgment. I think that's one of the reasons why I find writers like William James so helpful, because in many ways, William James was a Harvard psychologist who, what you probably know, was reacting against the realization in mid-1850s America that actually there were a whole range of issues that could not be resolved by experiment or by rational reflection, and yet decisions had to be taken. And in effect, his pragmatic approach to truth is partly a recognition that sometimes you have to make decisions when the evidence is either ambivalent or perhaps very difficult to interpret. So I think I would agree with you. Wherever possible, we want to rely on evidence. And that is a very important subspectrum of our understanding of what is knowledge. But it doesn't extend everywhere. And the problem is we very quickly find ourselves in an area of life where, in effect, we don't have the ability to reduce what are very often ethical or existential questions to scientific equivalents, and thus be able to use the evidential criteria. So you've made a very good point, and it does illustrate very often how difficult these things can be to engage. Thank you.
Let's add a contemporary example from modern science. Is Pluto a planet? You can keep adding more and more evidence, but you have to make a judgment of reason sooner or later, and it's not so easy, and it's obviously still controversial.
So can I
yes,
add something? Because it's very interesting. Max Planck, Max Planck was a member of the Academy, a leader, was vice president. And he published many books in the end of his life about religion and science. And he said, the point of conversion, we don't know, it's not the good word, conversion, but the point we touch one another is when the scientists discover something, some law, something, and say, this is not my invention. I discovered this. And immediately comes the question, who put this law that I discovered? So this is the beginning of the question. Science put the question, but not give the answer.
We have about 5 minutes left. The lady here, yes.
Thank you, Your Excellency and Professor. It's been terrific. So I'm a neuroscientist. I'm a woman of faith too. I'm a Catholic. I work in pain, which is very core to many things of the Catholic Church. And my question to you is, if you've made a strong argument for the specialness of humans with this transcendental ability and the soul being different. If there was evidence, because what we've learned in neuroscience is that the more clever we get at actually testing animal behaviour and doing more intelligent experiments, the more we unveil actually a lot about them and their social environments and their constructs that actually matches quite closely human societies. So would it strengthen or weaken your argument for the relationship with God and faith, and belief is such a core aspect of how we function, if the evidence became stronger that animals do have a capacity to have a religious element to their existence, or they didn't?
So I don't, if I just summarise for the camera, are we doing animals down? Should we have if we have a greater respect for animals' social abilities, ability to feel pain?
Well, it's more a little bit more precise than that. It's about the specialness that.
Yeah, we're kind of.
Oh yes, okay.
I understand.
Okay, got it. Yes.
For non-human animals,
Right.
would it strengthen or weaken? I mean, how would we reflect on that? Should
So,
the evidence,
look.
which I don't doubt will come, but there also are abilities to have a religious-like practice.
I understand.
for non-human animals.
I understand the question is very important. And look, I think, this is my personal opinion, it's not a formal opinion of the academy, no. But the evidence that we have for these spiritual things, like the existence of soul, God, is a very strong evidence, but it's completely different of the evidence of sciences. Because it's clear that you can make an experiment and you can make a demonstration of this experiment one time, other time repeat the experiment of your conclusion. In science, please give me the formula and I can prove that this is true and I do this experiment and I conclude. This is another thing. It's a sort of Glaube, say the German, it's a sort of faith, but it's an evidence very strong, different of the evidence of science. Different, because we can reproduce the experiment, that is clear. We can reproduce the experiment of the existence of God. We can reproduce the experiment of the soul. No, but this is the question. What is the way? The actions. We reflect, and this is very important psychology, the same that you said. We reflect in our actions. And in the we don't have a vision directly of our soul. That is clear. Not philosophers say this. No one. No, maybe someone, but not important. In the contrary, we reflect of our actions, and we understand that we have something that transcends the matter. Something in our action. Knowledge, maybe some experiment of neurologic, and conclusion is we have some principle of this that transcends the matter. And we call this soul all the things. Maybe mind, maybe intellect, maybe will, maybe freedom, but there's something transcends the matter.
What I would say is when I read Darwin, I see a sort of almost like intuition or anticipation of some of the points you've made. But for me, it sort of emphasizes the interconnectedness of the biosphere. And perhaps there is something special about us in that we have discerned this interconnectedness and recognized the vulnerability of ecosystems and therefore our responsibility towards those who cannot actually consciously change things for themselves. And so actually the point you've made, I think is a very important point. It does emphasize our responsibility to try and keep the show on the road, to try and minimize the environmental damage, because we're part of a bigger system. And it's very much about this idea of being part of something bigger. And that's one of the reasons why I find the language of creation helpful, because it is trying to get across the idea that there's something bigger than us here. And we don't fully understand it, and we don't quite understand what we're meant to be doing either, but nevertheless protecting it, because we realize how vulnerable and fragile it is, and how actually we now seem to be implicated in its vulnerability. I think that gives us a lot of pause for thought. So it's a very good question.
I want to add a little comment about the questioner, because I didn't recognize her with her mask on, but when she took it off, this is Professor Irene Tracy, and she is the second Catholic warden of Merton College, Oxford, since the Reformation. And Merton College was founded by a Catholic bishop, so we see we have a long-standing Catholic connection in this university.
You and I were at Merton.
Sorry?
Both you and I were at Merton.
Both of us were at Merton?
Yeah.
We better finish with one more question, Peter.
Thank you very much. So I have one final question, and that sort of touches back on the evidence base. So you suggested that there are questions where evidence is not an appropriate way to approach the problem. But there seem to be questions where evidence is the right way to approach the problem. And Professor Shipsey, for example, mentioned creation, that it may be the Big Bang and not 7 days, or how humans were created, maybe there was an evolution and not just someone saying that. So what do you say on these sorts of scientific problems where there does seem to be scientific evidence which seems to contradict what is written in a scripture, call it the Bible or something else for other religions?
Just repeat that. How do we face those questions where scripture seems to contradict science?
But, sorry, really contradiction is a very strong word. That are problem, some difficulty to understand, but contradiction, we can say that we have a sort of contradiction that complete opposite. Contradiction is two things that are opposite, black and nor. We are not, I don't think that, what are the contradictions? What are really contradiction things? What are the statement that contradicts faith in science, and what is statement that contradicts science in faith? So I don't think that it's a contradiction. We can say we don't know is the beginning, is the Big Bang or not, but this is a problem. Science is not a problem of faith. Yes, faith say that it's a beginning in the time, but it's faith. It's not philosophy, it's faith. For Thomas Aquinas, for example. I follow Thomas Aquinas in this, and not San Bonaventura. So, but this is not a contradiction, really. And what are the other contradictions? We can demonstrate the existence of soul in science. Okay, but it's not a contradiction. It's some different dimension of the reality. So, really, I don't find a contradiction. What are contradictions for you?
A little comment to that. The Big Bang Theory was condemned in the Soviet Union. Not many people know that, because in 1948 they said it's encouraging the clergy. You know. So well, that sort of gets forgotten from the histories a bit. Sadly, we have to finish. It's 7:30. Thank you so much for our wonderful speakers, Bishop Sorondo, As McGrath, Professor Ian Shipsey, Maria Beer, and wish you a very good evening. Please join me in thanking our speakers.